Thanks. Well, get them to introduce themselves, but keep it short because no one wants to know about your job titles.
Hi, guys. Yeah, I was trying to get elected in the last panel for the Latam board. I'm Rafa Pellon. I'm a lawyer in Brazil and consultant of policies and initiatives for MEF Latam. And I've been working with trying to tackle fraud for 3 years now in Brazil. We actually started the messaging initiative in Brazil a while ago with the Brazilian aggregators. Some of them are here today. And well, since I'm a lawyer, I'm always trying to see the legal side of things and where are the gray areas and how we can clarify something and be more transparent with both players of this whole ecosystem, and how can we also get somewhere useful for everybody.
Hi, I'm Doug Gardner. I'm not a lawyer. I'll keep it short. I work at Twillio, where I run the carrier relationships worldwide. This is my first event to attend here, and I'm just glad to be on the panel.
Hi, I'm Javier from Openmarket. Much as Doug here, I'm looking after the global carrier relations on Openmarket, and yeah, keeping it short.
Hi, Matt Hooper from RMI Mobile, SVP. Put it simply, been working in the messaging market about the past 15 years across multiple territories, so we got some interesting perspectives that hopefully will stimulate some discussion.
Hi, James Lasbrey, Global Lead for Messaging within Telefonica and Vice Chair for MEF.
Okay, so what came across in your questions, your excellent questions, which keep them coming. Anytime you want to stick your hand up and interrupt, please do, because it's more interesting to hear what you've got to say than me. But you guys were sort of talking a little bit about the perception of this issue. So I'm going to ask James first. How much does Telefonica know/care about some of these abuses on A2P messaging, from your experience?
Depends on which market you're looking at, but I'd probably say very little. And this is the reason for this initiative. It's not about Telefonica. It's about the whole market, because unless we start to fix this and the people in this room actually start to step forward to help educate both Telefonica and the rest of the operators in the markets, nothing will change. And we've got a huge opportunity here within messaging, which I think you're all fairly committed to. You need to try and help us as operators to start dealing with this.
But what about some of the issues that were talked about with, maybe another department selling M2M chip, selling M2M SIMs is, quite happy with the way things are going. I mean, how do you resolve those internal issues and get everybody to, pull in the same direction?
I think Robert Gersman spoke about it there. It's about some things are termed fraud, but they're not really, because operators haven't set clearly in the T's and C's that SIMs, for example, can only be used for consumer use. In the UK, a similar process went through for grey routes. And it's on both sides. It's both the KPIs that are set for the corporate and business teams, which are incentivize them to sell the SIMs, but it's also the third-party resellers that then sell those SIMs on. And there's actually a case in the UK in December where we obviously looked to remove the grey routes in the UK. A third-party reseller then counteracted that and took O2 UK to court, and they lost on that basis. So we're taking the best practice from the UK, and we're looking to roll that out into markets like Brazil, Germany, Spain, where all of these cases of fraud exists. But the question for me is around speed, because clearly as operators we do move quite slowly, so we need to try and take measures to try and speed that up.
There you go. Operators move slowly. You heard it here first. So, Rafa, what about enforcing some of these issues? I mean, James just mentioned about taking this to Brazil. How enforceable are some of these sanctions that you can take against these rogues?
Yeah.
You're a lawyer.
Yeah. Is this on? Yeah. Actually, in Brazil, for the ones who aren't aware of that, grey routes in Brazil are actually illegal. It's on our telecom law. So we cannot just pick up a SIM farm and just start operating. It's legally it's compared with pirate radio that I think you Brits invented somewhere in the 80s. Yeah, Brazilians liked it, so we used it a lot. Right now, in terms of enforcement, we actually had like some pretty strong cases when I was the GM of MEF Latam a couple of years ago, and we started fighting this. We got to the point where I was getting death threats, so you guys can take a little idea of how serious this is. I'm also carioca, so I'm not afraid of death threats. Yeah, you all seen the movie. But yeah, it's illegal. We had carriers like TIM already got people arrested in the northeast of Brazil for doing that. It is a serious and criminal issue. MEF doesn't take anyone to courts or anything like that. We know about all of the weakness. We know we have a lack of transparency. We have a lack of awareness and education. We've been trying to work on these 3 pillars: education, better and transparent business models, and actually penalties. So if we're trying to move everyone to the right side of the business, so we have companies that actually weren't doing everything right in day one. They were all keen to try to evolve, mature, and like go to the light side of the force on this one. We still have a lot of SIM farms, and we still have a lot of problems. But at least we are getting to somewhere more clear and transparent for everyone.
Have there been monetary gains? Have you seen the industry, operators and aggregators making more money from your actions?
We are seeing people getting more embarrassed of selling SIM farms. We are seeing people trying to hide it. We are seeing people that were just doing that, at least offering options to their customers, saying you can buy, like they put a lot of wonderful names, but it's usually you can get real messaging and you can get messages that will arrive, but we don't really know if they will arrive anywhere. So, and then they call certified messaging and non-certified messaging. They put a lot of names, but at least we don't see companies just trying to say, oh, it's messaging, it will go anywhere you send it. At least they're embarrassed right now. I'm still alive.
For the moment. Doug, maybe you can tell us, what your perception of this issue is, because you're occupying a slightly different place from everybody else on the panel. So
yeah, with what I'm hearing from you and what I heard from the other gentleman earlier, it's a mess. Our company is in the business of helping developers innovate, and to unleash innovation, you need to have access. You need to have consistency, and you have to have transparency. So when we talk about my role at the company, and I'm a buyer of many of these services, which we then want to make available to the developers, I want to buy the right services. I want high quality, I want reliability, I want legitimate routes, but my ability to divine that is almost zero. And it's a competitive marketplace. So if I have another competitor and they seem to be able to offer a service at a price below what I can, then I really have to question, well, how can they do that? So yeah, it's a complex problem. I would certainly encourage a lot more transparency. I would encourage a lot more consistency across operators on rules. I would encourage a lot more communication of exactly what the expectations are for entities that wish to participate in the ecosystem. That will help. Hopefully, that helps the folks that wish to engage in message conversations with their customers in some form, to at least know what the right thing to do is, and if they do the right thing, to know that their messages are going to get through.
Has it affected you so far, do you think? I mean, is this a perception issue, or are you actually losing business, or?
It's not just a perception issue. I wouldn't go so far as to say we would lose business over the confusion we see today, but it does create confusion. So for us, we have customers that are trying to build and develop something. So we may have a scenario where a terrific new app is built, And in that app, what we were in the business of doing is making it easy to add communication into an app or web service. So let's say they build an app, they've got a success in the App Store suddenly. They've tested everything out along the way. They get 1 million downloads, and suddenly when somebody wants to authenticate, they can't authenticate to the app. And then our phone rings, and the question is, well, what did I do wrong? It's like, well, for this type of a service that you've built, that's not consistent with how certain operators want the ecosystem to run. Therefore, you need to go through a different route to actually validate your users. Now, at the moment that somebody has 1 million downloads and they can't validate any of those 1 million downloads, that's the wrong time to figure out that this choice for communication was the wrong choice. So we really need to understand the consistency and the rules ahead of time, just so people can make the right choices.
So Javier, what's your experience of this issue? You're right at the aggregator side of it. So why now? Why is this issue? Why is MEF suddenly addressing this issue now? What do you think has made it so pressing?
So actually, we have discussed a lot about the bad things, but the weaknesses that we can see. But actually, it's a lot of opportunity that we can also see. So we at Openmarket are constantly defining new use cases with big enterprises out there. We have 4 out of 10 big brands globally working with us, and they are really eager to do SMS. So the issues that we have is that actually we want to be offering a reliable and sustainable solution. I agree here with Doug, and we're entering in expenses on our operations to actually maintain these things that we can have actually been able to build and sell to these enterprises. So it's actually harming us to be able to sell and customers that are engaged and they want to do more and know more about SMS.
So let's try and be a bit more optimistic now, and let's talk about some of the. I mean, obviously, messaging. We're all here because of messaging, and messaging has been part of this industry for 15, 20 years. But as we all know, we're in a position now where we have multiple options for messaging, not just from a P2P basis, but also an A2P basis. So how can a company like yours, Matt, go to a company and talk about enterprise messaging? And factor in these various alternatives, how can you sell SMS as something that should be core to their offering?
Yeah, well, I think one of the key things that we see as we go around and talk to various organizations across sectors across the world is that if you go over into the enterprise domain, there are not that many organizations, enterprises that are effectively using messaging and the interactivity opportunities of messaging within their customer journey. Which is a great opportunity, but at the same time, we find there's lots of roles now cropping up, head of digital, head of messaging, head of APIs that have never existed over the years in organizations, and now they're there. But there's actually a lot of help required in order to bring this stuff together. And one of the other aspects that comes up, we talk about whether over-the-top messaging platforms are a threat to SMS or whether it's about sort of harmony. And it's got to be harmony all the way, because if you look at a customer journey, whether it's in the retail space, utilities, banking, anything that has a rich, potentially a rich consumer experience, these days you've got to work out how to blend in different types of messaging based on the context of the consumer at the end of the day. So that's a huge opportunity. But the industry as a whole, especially the enterprise sector, is crying out for help at the moment. And I think that's a great opportunity for MEF, a great opportunity for this group to really set down some standards in terms of actually how to enterprises to embrace messaging a lot further. Because I see that part of the marketplace is still very much in its advent, and that goes back to what we've been talking about here about getting the basics sorted out. Talking about fraud and some of these other elements. So the time is absolutely right to get this done, because anything that can impact the consumer experience is potentially going to impact an enterprise negatively in terms of adopting and taking on some of these new great technologies which are now being made available. So it's basics, hygiene factor stuff. It's got to be done.
So are the enterprises kind of aware of these issues? I mean, what are they factoring in when they're buying from you? Are they saying, look, how much does it cost? How interactive is it? How targeted can I be with it? I mean, where are their priorities? Again, Matt.
Yeah, so There's a couple of different factors. I think if you're working with large corporate enterprises, for example, the fact of the matter, you're dealing with a lot of deep enterprise architecture, a lot of it's legacy. You've got a lot of data locked away in the back end. We're living in a real-time world now. At the end of the day, I think in the next sort of couple of years, we're going to have around about sort of 4 zettabytes of data just flying around all over the place, and 90% of that is basically has been created in just the last 2 years. So in terms of actually harnessing that, utilizing that, which comes down to being able to provide a service to a consumer based on context, what they happen to be doing, at the part of the day, whether they're a business user, whether they're a consumer, what their location is, what device they happen to be using. Messaging is absolutely vital because it underpins everything in terms of communication, whether you're using Facebook Messenger, SMS, whether it's one-way interactive, but ultimately it's got to be able to integrate well, deep into business processes, and the people that operate systems and serve customers have got to be able to use this stuff, understand it, and work out the impact on customer experience. So it's a huge opportunity, but there's also a gap there at the moment in terms of a lot of the enterprises we see and being able to actually serve the customers in the way they know they have to, in the way they want to, but are still a little bit hampered by either knowledge or standards, and also how to actually integrate that into their organizations.
How about you, Douglas? What are enterprises saying to you about how they use messaging and where their priorities are in terms of the kind of messaging that they want to use?
Well, for us, our model is a little bit different. Our model is about serving the developer. So it's the innovator that's at it in an enterprise, and they have a great idea that's going to improve some aspect of their company. The challenge is, how do they create that? So just your question earlier, like, does that person know the rules around messaging? Like, no, they don't. What they know is that they have a great idea to improve workflow at the company, and they'll find a platform like Twillio and build a solution and see if they can in fact implement what they're trying to do. Generally, if you're doing something and the use case is going to be benefit to the company, probably what you're doing is going to be aligned with a lot of the rules and regulations, but perhaps not. But they'll build it and they'll try it, and then scale it from there.
So you work with Uber, for example.
Yes.
Quite famously. So how are they using messaging, and how has messaging enabled them to grow into this fabulous unicorn that they've become?
Yeah, it's a great example of the power of embedding communication into an application. So getting the communication in the right context and at the right time. One of the big concerns when we talk about spam and abuse, we're talking about messages that at the end of the day a consumer does not want. In the case of an Uber experience, when the car is about to pull out front and you get a message that says your car's out front, you really wanted that message. And you don't even think about it. You don't even think, oh, I just got a text from Uber that just debited my text bucket. What you think is, great, I know the driver's out front and time to leave. So those are the kind of the future innovations that we're seeing out there. And I think that's kind of what enterprises are tapping into and innovators are tapping into, is how do you take this legacy communication system and bring it into contemporary software development. And when you're bringing it in the context like what you're seeing with an Uber, you get terrific customer experiences out of it.
So I'm intrigued to know, how that deal might have come about. So Uber create their concept, and they think, oh, well, we obviously need a messaging platform so that people know that the car is coming. So do they come to you? Do they say, we'll talk to Twillio? Do they think, oh, we need to speak to operators? How do they arrive at your doorstep?
That's a great question. Uber wasn't always the big company that it is today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? It was a guy with a kind of a novel idea, and his challenge was, how does he build that? If you think about the challenges to a developer, if you decide you want to add voice or something into an app or service, and you go talk to carrier and say, hey, I need some phone numbers and I need some voice minutes. Oftentimes you're told, well, how many do you need? And our minimum monthly spend is like $30,000 a month. So a developer can't start like that with a prototype. So platforms like Twillio make it easy to, with your credit card, very quickly go online and begin building apps and services that communicate. So you can begin provisioning phone numbers, begin with minutes and messaging at a very low cost on an a la carte basis. So what I've got more like a retail channel to enable your app or service on telecoms.
So Javier, as an aggregator, where do you see, which verticals do you see the big opportunities in for ATP's next stage?
So actually, we are seeing that there's a really wide number of verticals that can be followed. We see that financial services is today actually a vertical that is really interested on the security services that they can actually enable through SMS, something that is reducing costs for them. We see that in retail, we see that in large enterprises, in all different types of consumers. Government is actually these days very interested in engaging with its citizens to actually do many different things. So as I was saying previously, we only see more and more opportunities, and where we think actually we have different business models that we can apply. And what we see is that what these type of enterprises want, they are not looking to hook up into a on-site website online and log in. They have actually vetting processes, RFPs that they need to go through. And if behind the scenes we cannot offer reliability to them, they're going to look for a different channel to actually do the same business process.
And James, do you, your department within Telefonica, and what kind of opportunities are you looking at? Which industries are you talking to?
So
Do you see that as your role to, to sell the idea of SMS, or are you leaving it to the guys to your left?
So in most of our markets, aggregators represent probably 75% of the total kind of business messaging that's provided. So I think that's an interesting point, kind of who do we see the obligation of selling? What we see as the obligation is actually making sure it's a trusted path. The consumer is educated, and we allow the consumer to decide on the best route for him. And at no time would we say one or the other is the best route. It's up to the company that fits them. I think the interesting point which we're coming on to is kind of how do we move beyond where we are at the moment, and how do we really expose the kind of growth that we're seeing? And we see it in two areas. We see it as evolving the messaging product that we have today, and that could be globalizing it, because I don't think any operator has integrated the kind of global proposition, and also adding data to that. The second side that we see is brands that we see from aggregators are increasingly not just asking for SMS, they're asking for a fully integrated suite of services. And that's a big challenge, and this is the rationale for having this work stream, because us as Telefonica, and I'm sure the other operators would agree, how do you pick which APIs to launch? How do you pick which other services to integrate? We actually need the customer insights. You represent 70 to 80% of our markets. We need this kind of forum to start giving us the answers so that we can start working with you.
We have a question from the gentleman on the third row here. It's just coming.
I'm Cassio from Zenvia. Since we're discussing the future of messaging, how do you guys see the threat of OTT players, instant messaging players such as WhatsApp, entering the A2P market, providing the same services that we provide using SMS?
All right, I'll go first. We'll see how I do. I mean, I just see it. I don't necessarily see that as a threat. I mean, I get for some businesses that are focused purely on messaging, it could certainly be perceived as a big threat. It's just the nature of evolution. So the challenge, I think, for the folks in the room here, the challenge for the operators who largely depend on this revenue stream or would like to see this revenue stream grow, is to bring down some of those barriers to access and make it easier to adopt messaging. If it's not easier to adopt messaging, you can just imagine the kind of world if all these IP chat services began opening API sets to allow developers to integrate directly into those communication streams. I mean, it clearly can disintermediate largely the operators and everybody in the ecosystem between the end customer and the brand. But it's just kind of natural evolution. And so I think we should expect that it's going to change, and what folks are using to communicate with a decade from now is not really what they're using today, and we have to adapt.
I mean, it's already happening, isn't it? That obviously in the Far East, WeChat and so on, they've become platforms for all sorts of mobile exchange, and Facebook's going the same way. I mean, what's happening in Brazil? Rafael, there's quite a lot of over-the-top players there.
Yeah. Well, very good question. In Brazil, messaging is like if you pick up the top 10 apps of all time in Brazil, 3 of them are messaging ones. I think just one isn't, but it's also Facebook, the Facebook app. We are kind of building business on top of apps, and people are communicating like all day long using this. But at the same time, because of all of this, there's an opportunity for messaging companies. First, because if you spend all of your day on messaging, there's a lot of noise. Second, we don't have the state-of-the-art networks in Brazil. We have 4G in major cities, then it's 3G, then it's GSM. And yeah, WhatsApp doesn't work on that. So whenever it's critical, and amongst all of the noise, we know that people at some point start just looking at it because it's too noisy. But what we are discovering is that whenever it's too much, whenever we need something critical or something credible, there's nothing like SMS. So people are starting to realize that the old system sometimes is better than the OTTs. And yeah, they're just discovering new applications for that on health, banking, and payments, and a lot of stuff.
Is price a kind of a benefit? Is the fact that there's a slight premium now on SMS, or a perceived premium on SMS compared to some of these over-the-top platforms, is that actually a benefit in the sense that people respond more quickly to an SMS?
Pricing right now in Brazil, like most of the carriers, like the 4 biggest carriers, they have like flat rates for SMS because no one was using it. Everyone was just moving towards 4G and data. If you go to any retail point of these carriers, they're not announcing SMS or anything else. They're just saying, buy 4 giga of data, do whatever you want with the rest. So people are not paying more because of this. They already have everything, kind of the SMS for, they say unlimited, but it's usually 2,000 or 3,000 messages a month, which is, for a regular person, it's enough. So you don't pay anything more because of that.
Hi, I'm Paul from Openmarket. One of the things that I experienced in the entertainment industry, for 20 years, they'd release a blockbuster movie, and at some point you'd be prepared to pay £20 for it. Today, you probably want to download it for nothing, and you don't want to pay for it. Their biggest problem was they spoke about volumes, they spoke about commodity values, and they never really as an industry got around the proposition of what's the true value of what it is we do. And one of the things I think is really mission critical for this particular group is to talk about the value that it really gives to the consumer and to the enterprise business, because if we start trading half cents and fractions of cents, I think our job becomes increasingly difficult. And actually, what happened in the entertainment industry is everybody ate one another until the lunch was too small. So one of the things I would encourage is that actually when we talk about the value of SMS, we talk about, how much would you pay for something that could get to someone so very quickly and doesn't go down a route where most of the people don't open it and don't act on it and don't do anything about it. So I would just say that I think the part of the future is actually redefining the value of it, because the value proposition is phenomenal. I just think we lose a bit of sight on it.
Anyone got any comments?
Yeah, so look, that's a great point, and I think if just to sort of pick one example in the enterprise space is the potential of interactive messaging has got the opportunity to potentially redefine, for example, the contact center industry. So you're now finding, just as a sort of web chat crept into contact centers, you're finding interactive SMS, those kind of elements, because at the end of the day, 65% of people prefer to be contacted and to engage in dialogue over SMS via voice. So, and that's something that is only just sort of come about. We talked to a lot of contact centers, and a lot of these guys want to start to use messaging and messaging platforms to reach out, especially when dealing with areas like collections, settlements, appointment bookings, those kind of things. But it's still a pretty early market, going back to some of the points that I made earlier. So again, that's part of that redefining something which has always been seen as fairly simple. And it kind of is almost like Groundhog Day, having sort of gone through the first cycle in terms of messaging when the first instant messaging platforms came around, back in the mid-2000s. We were all talking about, well, SMS is dead, and it was, IMPS, and then it was some of the big vendors, proprietary sort of messaging platforms. Didn't happen. And just the same way, we've got some of these new sort of app-based messaging platforms, and there's a place for them. But that's not going to be to the detriment of SMS. Absolutely not. There's new ways to use this stuff, and quite rightly, as the gentleman said there, it's about the sort of the mind shift, really, in terms of getting our heads around the fact that we're kind of just at the start of a new phase of the industry. Absolutely.
Do your customers get that? Do you have to sell them the idea that, according to surveys, 98% of people respond within 5 minutes or whatever the numbers are, or do they actually know all this, or do you have to actively sell it to them?
Well, look, you get differing sort of differing viewpoints depending which industry you're going into, or what organisation. But I think certainly as we talk about digital transformation, innovation around bringing mobile into the heart of the enterprise, into the heart of the business. I think talking to the Gardner guys the other week, their view is that mobile as a medium in terms of customer engagement and from a strategy and a technology perspective is still pretty poorly used. Now I can see the strategies are forming quite nicely. A lot of enterprises, they know what they want to do. It's just a case of understanding how to do it, when to do it, and the usual kind of things that get in place around having sponsorship at board level and being able to really have a clear understanding and understand how someone's going to be made a hero in an enterprise for taking a risk and doing this stuff versus playing it safe and not. But over the next 5 years, organisations that don't take mobile to their core, because that is the world we live in terms of in terms of consumerism these days and the way we use mobility as a whole, those organisations are really going to come unstuck. It's, pure and simple.
And a question from this gentleman, halfway down.
Thank you for calling me a gentleman, but I assure you I'm not one. So
You don't look like a lady.
You don't know me well enough yet. Birdcats, iConnective sales messaging for LATAM. I want to pretty much mirror what Matt said, and I think Paul from Openmarket. I think, particularly in LATAM, that the opportunity is to redefine the space. I mean, right now, what I understand from carriers is that somewhere between 85 and 90% of the traffic in these countries is one-way alerts from banks and from airlines and places like that. What I'm finding is that what's being total virgin in that market is this whole interactive space, two-way space, mobile marketing. I've talked to well over 50 brands and 15 agencies, and when you walk in, everybody's enamored with mobile marketing and apps. The reality is that in a place like LATAM, the smartphone penetration is still below 50%, and of those, about a third only have data plans. So you're talking about 85% of the market that today is not reachable. And the reality is, in LATAM, for example, there's more people that use messaging than have toilets. If you want to do mobile marketing, which every brand wants to do, the only way to do it and get it started is via SMS. So at least for me, I think both these guys were right. It's a matter of how do you redefine the space and the game, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to educate these brands, because for me, the biggest part of the sales cycle is education. It cost me 2 to 3 months to bring somebody on board to understand what do I do with this information. It's not about selling a message. It's about selling the data that comes with that message, a phone number in a prepaid market, maybe a name, maybe an email address, maybe what I'm interested in. They don't have it. They want it. So just an observation, and I hope that my colleagues will agree that this is a problem. I know, Rafael, you and I have spoken about this a handful of times. Place is wide open, in my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, well, on the optimistic note from that gentleman there, I will wrap this up because we've got a party to go to. So I will thank all our panelists. I'll urge you to join in the initiative and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you very much.